It is my privilege to welcome you on this beautiful Sunday afternoon, late afternoon. We've had a beautiful day, not too hot, and hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Well, we have an interesting study, again a study that you have probably heard as children, Daniel in the lion's den. That's what we heard about as children. This is chapter 6 of the book of Daniel. Now in our introduction, we are looking at now not at Babylon, but we are looking at Medo-Persia. In our lesson last week, we learned of the last night of Babylon. Belshazzar was its king, and because they had a great orgy happening and were drunk and invited their lords, and they took vessels from the Lord's house way back from Jerusalem, the Lord said that is enough. And when God says it is enough, then there is no more probation. So Belshazzar was slain that night. Miraculously, Daniel was not. You know, Daniel, probably about late 80s, maybe 87 or 88 years of age, he survived when Belshazzar and his lords and those that made up his government, when they were slain. And so we read that Cyrus, who was the commander of the Medo-Persian army, it pleased him to put Darius in as the first king. Darius was a Mede. It was a coalition of the Medes and the Persians. Now when you read, Darius was already 62 years of age. And in those days, that was just about the lifespan of many of the monarchs. We don't hear much more after this chapter about this Darius. There's another one that comes up later with the same name, but a different man. But here, Darius gets put at the helm of the Medo-Persian Empire, and Darius must have been a good organizer. So he sees this vast kingdom that he is now in charge of, and he decides to put governors and other people in to keep account and the whole people accountable, so that the kingdom would come to no loss. And that is where we take up the story this evening. Before we do, let's begin with the word of prayer. Our loving Father in heaven, we thank you that we have such a beautiful day and that we are able to come to study your word together. We pray, please touch our hearts, that we will be strangely moved by the wonderful stories and the commitment that we read about, and may we learn from it. Please teach us through your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, Amen. Now, Luke is unable to be here tonight, so I've asked Peter whether he would be happy to come and read chapter 6 of the book of Daniel for us.
So Daniel chapter 6. Verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, Forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom and governors, and the princes, the councillors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the decree, and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplications before his God. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decrees. Hast thou not signed a decree, that every man shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on vows to deliver him. And he laboured till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lord, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace, and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. And then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest, continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before me, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast him into the den of lions. Them, their children, their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, and hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
Thank you, Peter. What an amazing story, isn't it? Again we see that God is not taken by surprise. God has everything in his control. He puts people there, he removes kings, he changes situations, the animals listen to him, the lions were hungry, as is testified when the enemies of Daniel were thrown in. They didn't even reach the bottom. But Daniel was thrown in, and God shut them out. So let's go to question 1. We just have a little reminder how Cyrus conquered the great Babylon. He dug ditches, or his soldiers dug ditches away from the river, and at a given command he said, break the little part between the ditches and the river. And so the water suddenly ran sideways and didn't go through the city as it did beforehand. And the soldiers were drunk. They were so confident that Babylon the Great would not fall, that they ended up leaving the inner gates unlocked. There were double gates, the outside gates were locked, but now the water level was low and the soldiers were able to get into the city. And so that same night Belshazzar was slain and his government, and Darius was set in to be king. So we go to question 1. King Darius installs a new government. What changes in government were made by Darius to the threat on Daniel's life? Well, we read in the Bible, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, provincial governors, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors. It makes a lot of sense when you have to organize something. Don't do all the work yourself. Get others in to help you to look after smaller portions of the kingdom. And so I think he must have been a very experienced and good organizer, so that the commander Cyrus set Darius over the kingdom first, so he could organize it for as long as he was alive, and when somebody else takes over, they have a working government. We go to the artist's impression of the king, but question 2, who was to be one of the 3 governors? So it said quite clearly, the king chose 120 governors, and over the 120 there would be 3, and Daniel was to be one of the 3. So far, so good. However, Daniel is a Judean exile. He's been there in Babylon almost 70 years, and the Medo-Persians didn't have a lot of time for him or for them. They were foreigners, not just not even Babylonians. And so you can imagine when the king sets up his kingdom, there were many people that thought they should be amongst the 3 governors. But now they see that Daniel is one of them. And that didn't go down very well. Why did the king consider promoting Daniel to the position of supreme governor? Now imagine, the king is 62 years old. Daniel is probably at least 25 years older. He has reached a ripe old age that very few people at that time would reach. So many people would say, well, he should be retired. We don't know why he would be there. However, it tells us again and again about Daniel that an excellent spirit was found in him. When you have somebody that has an excellent spirit, you want to use them for your benefits as long as you can. You have nothing to fear, because he is governed by an excellent spirit, not by an evil spirit. And so when they see that the king is now thinking of putting Daniel in the supreme position, that would mean that Daniel, who was prime minister under Nebuchadnezzar, that he would now, in his old age, be again called to be prime minister under Darius of the Medo-Persian Empire. When they saw that this was the king's purpose, they started to get very angry. Well, we know when people get angry, the brain doesn't work as good. They make decisions in a hurry, and they didn't have much time. Because that night they talked to each other. They had a secret meeting, and they said, we must get rid of Daniel. Why did the king consider promoting Daniel? Because an excellent spirit was found in him. Enemies emerge, it says on question 4, they emerge quickly when it comes to politics, especially when favored appointments are being made. And you know, if you watch the news, you hear these things happening even today. Somebody is appointed before someone else, and certain people are not happy with the decision. Some contenders will stoop to anything to bring down their rivals. Usually they start with fitness for office. They are not fit for this kind of office. Or look at their track record, or allegations of corruption. That sounds like something from the news in our day. How successful were Daniel's opponents in their attempts to discredit him? Well, they went to a lot of trouble to try and find something they could pin on him. And yet they had to say, not Daniel, but the opponents said they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful. Friends, if only that sort of judgment was made about you and me, what a different world we would live in. You know, we could go to dignitaries and discuss things openly, and we would sense we get a fair hearing. Well, Daniel was one of those people, but his opponents were not to be put off. They continued to find something that they could take. They said in question 5, we shall find no charge or fault against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Friends, today in our country here, if you keep God's law, you have no problems. The government is not against you because you keep God's law at the moment. The Bible says it will change. But at the moment we don't have any problems. If you honor your father and your mother, the police will not pick you up and put you in prison. If you keep the law of God, it is a good thing. At one time, the government thought everyone should swear on the Bible that they tell the truth. Today they have modified it because they're not so happy with the Bible. But never mind, here these opponents, they looked carefully at Daniel and they said, he is so stubbornly faithful that we find nothing unless it has to do with his belief or practice. Well, we have heard Peter read to us the verses. It says the account that Peter read about the plans made by Daniel's enemies. Let's look at them and see which one of these statements are true and which ones are false. First statement, the plan was to get the king to make a decree. Was that true? Yes. Second statement, no request or petition was to be made to any god or person other than the king. I don't know why the king signed this. It means the king would be very busy. You know, if everybody comes and says, King, I want to borrow some money, can I come and ask you? I mean, the king would get tired before the day is out. This statement, was it true or false? It was true. The ban on prayer was for a period of 50 days. Was that true or false? It was false.
30 days.
30 days, yes. Alfredo, you're right. It was for 30 days. We go to the next statement. Anyone found guilty of breaking the ban would be executed by hanging. True or false? False. Yes? How were they to be executed? By being thrown into the lion's den. The law of the Medes and Persians could be changed only if 10 or more people sign a petition. True or false? False. Last statement, the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed even by the king. True or false? True. Yes. So the king is uninformed. He doesn't know what to do. It says he set his heart on delivering Daniel before the sun went down. What a bad situation this was for the king. Now, what do you think the effect was on Daniel for this kind of law? Daniel knew about the plot. Well, as a top ruler, you would think he would have been informed. Did it change his mind about altering his way of worshipping his God? No. He went home and he prayed as usual, knowing that the enemies would watch him and they would take word back to the king. Would it not have been easier for Daniel to keep the window closed when he prayed? He could have done that, couldn't he? But why do you think he didn't do that? Do you think it would have been a denial of his faith in his God? Because his God had helped him all through the years, and it is like saying, I don't know whether God is going to protect me this time, I better keep the window closed. You know, friends, we will come into trying positions, and the Bible says we can trust God will be by our side. We don't need to have a plan B, just in case God doesn't do what he promises. God's promises are sure and steadfast. We can go straight ahead, not by presumption, but by faith, and rely on what God has promised. Presumption is relying on what God has not promised. But faith is trusting that God will be faithful, and God is faithful. And Daniel knew it, and here we have a good example of God's faithfulness. So let's go on. Yes, Daniel went home, he opened his window, he knelt down, and it says he knelt down 3 times a day, and he offered a prayer of thanksgiving and a prayer of praise to his God. That is a good habit to have, isn't it? It reminds you of God. God doesn't need to be reminded of us. He knows us inside out, but we need a reminder so that when there's trouble, we go to him first. We don't try all our options, and when we are unstuck, when we come unstuck, then we quickly go to God. No, we go to God first. Say, God, this is in your hands. I am happy for you to solve it, and I will do what you say. Okay, question 8. Who waited outside Daniel's window to catch him breaking the newly signed law? Then these men, which men were they? These men who went to King Darius and smothered him with praise and said, King, you are like a God. We want you to get proper recognition. So nobody is allowed to pray to any god or man, but they must come to you. So these men, they assembled outside Daniel's window, and they found Daniel praying. Friends, I wonder what would make, or whether it would make a big difference if your enemies, instead of plotting their downfall, if they saw you praying. They would know you're relying on a power that is outside of their control. Maybe the world would be a better place if we all thought more about God. Okay, question 9. We heard the report that was taken back to the king. What was the king's reaction? Most of the report was true, but one part was totally false. What was the part that was false? They said this Daniel from the Jewish exiles, he doesn't show any regard for your laws or for the command that was given. That was not true. Daniel was a good friend of King Darius. King Darius was fond of him. But when he heard the accusation, what did Darius think? Wow, Was I blind, or why did I sign this decree? Now I know why they came like that. How do we know whether the king cared about Daniel and whether he recognized Daniel's right to freely worship God? Well, it says, and the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. If I paraphrase it, he might have said something like, oh my goodness, now I know why they came. All they wanted to have Daniel killed. What a wicked people they were. Question 11. Darius would have done anything to rescue Daniel. But the supposed unchangeableness of Persian law finally forced the king to take action against him. How was Daniel the lawbreaker to be punished? The king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. The king first tried everything to change the law or to discontinue it. But he was bound by their own rules. Now think about it. Should men at any time say their law is unchangeable? You know, we have families, and the young husband and wife make rules for the children so that they can live within certain boundaries. But as they get older, mom and dad get older, the children get older, they won't have the same rules. They will change the rules because the ages of the children change. And while in the beginning they might say, at 6 o'clock you must be in bed. You need your sleep. When they get 16, they won't enforce that rule anymore. Times have changed. In all our spheres, things change. Our knowledge changes. You know, I remember not that long ago, they were talking about what did they call it? Which is now called climate change. What did they call it before?
Global warming.
Yes, and global warming. It was all about global warming, and then some people discovered, no, it's not warmer, it's colder. But it's also brought about through a change of certain factors. And so they've made a more general term now, which includes both or more, even things that we don't know of yet, and they call it climate change. Well, climate change could be for the warmer or for the colder, or for the wetter or the drier. It's all included in it. But it shows, even we today, we have to change things. We have to be mindful that what we say will not stand the test of time. We live in a changing world. That was the same in Daniel's day. When the king, when he could not change the law that defined his own government, that the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed, he had to give in and say, okay, bring this Daniel, tie him up, and throw him into the lion's den. I have never met a lion on a one-on-one. I haven't missed anything. The lions are very strong, powerful animals. Okay, what showed that Darius had some hope that God might save Daniel? Is there any hint given in the text that we read? Before Daniel disappeared in the lion's den, Darius said, almost in defiance against his opponents, he said, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. With other words, I can't deliver you. But your God, I know your God is a powerful God. How would he have known?
Previous history with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and other things.
Yes, we are now talking about a different country. But in those days, Daniel may well have been on the king's business in Medo-Persia, maybe in Greece too, in the surrounding countries. Daniel was recognized to be a very upright and faithful man. And Darius was very much a friend of Daniel and the other way around. So Darius had heard, he's 62. Babylon lasted 70 years. Most of Babylon's time with King Nebuchadnezzar, Darius would have been alive. And sure enough, he would have heard about what happened in Babylon. So he's putting his trust and his hope on Daniel's God. What a wonderful testimony of Daniel's example. So Daniel is now thrown into the lion's den, and the lions are speechless. Something has changed, because we heard in the reading that they were very hungry. However, here they don't do anything. In fact, the king with his presidents, out of precaution, they made sure that Daniel could not escape, and so they did three things. First, the king had a stone brought and laid upon the mouth of the den. So the king could not move the stone. Some of his servants put the stone there. And then the king, he sealed the stone with his own signet. So he was not free, even if he had the strength, to remove the stone. But thirdly, it was also sealed with the signets of his lords. So everyone had to agree before the king could open the lion's den. Now these seals, they prevented even the king, Darius himself, from getting Daniel out secretly. So what do you think the king now did? Daniel was thrown in the den of lions, and it was evening, and the king went home to retire for the evening. So we have some statements here that are true or false, and it says, take the correct statements and place a tick next to those which are true. The king lost interest in food. Yes. He did not want to listen to his usual evening music program. Yes. He could not sleep. We read this too, yes. He prayed all night to the gods. Did we read this? Let's go to the next one. He left his palace early in the morning and went to the lion's den. So you have a distraught, distressed king. No music, no food, no sleep. Early in the morning he is getting up and he is saying, I'm going to check on my friend. So when he arrives there, there's one question on his mind. One question, and that is, Daniel, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? You can just hear the old king with a shaky voice saying, did your God save you? And what do you think he heard from the lion's den? Lions or Daniel? He heard the familiar voice of Daniel. And not only the familiar voice, but look what he said. O king, my God has sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. So that's why the lion didn't eat him. They couldn't, because God had control over the animals. So what did the king do? Well, Daniel is explaining to him, when he said that the Lord has sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, he said, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Darius knew it. Darius knew Daniel could be trusted. But Daniel is saying, God is looking at me, and I was found innocent by God. Isn't that a wonderful confidence that Daniel had in his God? And not only that Daniel had in God, but he knew for himself, as far as he was able, he was faithful to God's requirements. You know, friends, there is a saying, a clean or a clear conscience is the best pillow to rest on. Have you ever heard it? If you have a bad conscience and you rush home and you want to sleep, your heart is pumping and your mind is wild and thinking, oh, what if they find out? But if you have a clear conscience, if you're innocent, you can go to sleep even if there's a bushfire or if there's some other calamity, and you know your life is in God's hands. And that was what Daniel knew here. Who actually had shut the lion's mouth? Well, he said, God had sent an angel and shut the lion's mouth. Angels are very powerful beings. At present, because we go through the chapter of earth history, the chapter of sin, the angels are called ministering spirits sent forth to minister to us. At other times, the angels might have very different work, because if nobody is in need of help, God has a work for them too. But at present, they are ministering to us. And here God only had to say the word, and an angel would immediately be down there and stop the lions thinking about their appetite. Friends, how did the king bring justice upon those who had plotted to destroy Daniel? Remember, just a few hours earlier, the king was so depressed, so distraught with the situation, he didn't know what to do. But he was so unhappy with himself that he had given in to his precedents. Now, he made a decision very quickly that these presidents, and their families, including their wives and children, were now to be cast into the den of lions. Judgment, quick and decisive. I'm glad I'm not in the leading realm of government. You know, they thought they were onto a good thing, but they were not happy with the decisions that the king made. And so they plotted. And in the end, the plotting bounced back on them. But not only them, even on their wives and children. Friends, like Nebuchadnezzar, Darius was elated or over the moon to discover the power of Daniel's God. He wanted to tell the whole world what message did he send throughout his whole kingdom. Now, like Nebuchadnezzar, he made a statement about what he believed the God of Daniel was like. And so he said, He is the living God. Now he could compare it to the gods of Medo-Persia. He could compare it to the gods of Babylon. And he says, but the God of the Jews, He is a living God. Now we believe the same too, don't we? Because we have experienced and we have read that God can be trusted. He also said, His kingdom shall not be destroyed. Now Darius was not as proud and high-minded as Nebuchadnezzar was. Nebuchadnezzar thought Babylon would be the eternal city. But God thought otherwise. But here Darius, who is now king of the Medo-Persian Empire, he said, but God's kingdom will never be destroyed. He also said, God delivers and rescues. None of his own gods could do anything like it. He says, He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. We are privileged that God is still the same. You know, we have different circumstances in our environment. The things sometimes seem to be out of control, the weather patterns, it is all changing, but we know God is in control. He is not bringing about the unstable weather, but because the weather is becoming unstable, God is still in control. We can still trust Him, even as Daniel did. Now the question is, did the night in the lion's den shatter Daniel's nerve or deflect him from his purpose in life? What was it that Peter read? No, he carried on, and he prospered during the reign of Darius and also during the reign of Cyrus, who came straight after Darius. So imagine Daniel's life. He was prime minister under Nebuchadnezzar. Then he might have been sidelined because two other kings came in, including Belshazzar. And when Belshazzar's kingdom fell, Daniel is there again, prime minister of Medo-Persia. What a blessed life he had, and everyone said the Spirit of the living God was in him. Now the question here is, if ever faced with demands that conflict with God's will, would you like to have the kind of faith and courage that Daniel had? Yes? You remember Daniel's three friends. They were confronted. Either you bow down to the golden image, or you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. They had the same faith, didn't they? And they said, whatever you do, King, it's your decision. But our God can, should he choose so, he can protect us. The king didn't believe it, but God showed him, yes, God is able to protect from the fiery furnace. And here, Darius learns God is able to protect from the lions. Okay, that brings us to our review quiz. In the review quiz, we just have 6 questions and a number of options for the answer. And you are to underline the correct answer. So the first statement says, the king who first ruled Babylon after the conquest of Belshazzar was Darius the Mede or Cyrus the Great? Which one? Darius the Mede. Cyrus was the general, but it said it pleased him to put Darius as the first king. So we go to question 2. Darius commanded his officers to A. Cast Daniel into the lion's den, or B. To take him out of the den. Who would say it is A? Who would say it is B? It was both correct answers.
Tricky question.
Okay, we go to question 3. Underline the correct answer. Daniel's custom was to pray on his knees or to pray twice a day. Which one is the correct statement?
3 times.
To pray on his knees. It said 3 times, but the options were only on his knees or twice a day. Okay, question 4. Because Darius did not favor Daniel, he sealed the lion's den so that Daniel could not escape. Or he spoke words of condemnation regarding him. Which one is the correct answer? It is A. The wording is a little bit confusing because Darius favored Daniel, but he couldn't do anything. His hands were tied, so to speak.
Because of the law.
Yes. So question 5. Darius wrote to all nations, A. about his great victory over Daniel's enemies, or B. about God's power to deliver Daniel. What was the content of his statement? About God's power to deliver Daniel. Yes, how God has been able to rescue him. In the last question, Darius declared that God's kingdom would A. come one day in the future, B. never be destroyed. It would never be destroyed. Yes? God's kingdom would also come one day in the future, but the main point here was our kingdoms will be destroyed, but God's kingdom will never be destroyed. Friends, this brings us to the end of Unit 7, Daniel in the lion's den. Now next week, we go into the prophetic part of Daniel. We have now covered the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. Just put it. You can just put on your sticky pad your name and the number of how many questions you got correct. And so we come to the end of this historical part of the book of Daniel. Next week we start with the prophetic part. And again, the principles that we have learned about the stories will also be repeated in the prophetic part. So it's a very interesting study that we continue in, but not the stories, but now the prophecies. So please do your homework and go through it, and then you'll be able to understand a lot more next week. But I'd like to thank you that you've come. You make the seminar so worthwhile, and I hope you have a good week. And we want to see you again next week if you can. But let us close with prayer. Our loving Father in heaven, thank you so much for the wonderful example that Daniel has set to all the generations after him about faithfulness to God. Thank you, dear Lord, for letting us know what we must do to please you, that is, to be obedient. And so please help us in our Christian journey, that we will all end up at the destination which is in your heavenly kingdom. We ask in Jesus' precious name. Amen.